She knew is a courtesan. She was born in a brothel, and her mother died during childbirth. So she knew was raised by a group of courtesans who fed her rice porridge mixed with wine to keep her quiet and not disturb the guests' moods. Later, she knew began to entertain guests. She knew Mr. Zhang is here. The madam called from downstairs. She knew hurried down the stairs in 2 or 3 steps and saw Mr. Zhang, her regular customer, who had studied abroad. What she hoped most was to be taken home by him. "You look beautiful today," he said, wrapping his arms around her waist and blowing softly at her collarbone. "How do I compare to the wives and concubines in your home? A room of straw and chaff. How can it compare to you?" His words struck her temper, and she broke free from his embrace, her face cold. "Mr. Zhang, don't summon me again. If you do, I won't respond." She sulked upstairs, slamming the door behind her. She had her reasons for being angry. She wanted him to marry her and take her home. But now, looking at it, if she returned home with him, she would likely turn into the chaff in his eyes, unwanted and unappreciated. A courtesan's life can't have a young lady's temper. Mr. Zhang has unwittingly offended you. He's likely to choose the younger Xiaoyu from now on and may not look at you again. The madam poked Xinu's shoulder afterward. Xinu replied, "Even a courtesan can have her temper." Rose, from the next room, was Xinu's rival. They had a feud when they competed for the top position. Later, Rose made a mistake and was crippled by the madam's henchmen, leaving her with few customers. Xinu didn't like Rose, but if she woke up early during the day, before her legs were spread, she enjoyed exchanging barbs with her. "I'll be glad the day you end up with a broken leg too," Rose said, throwing the largest date on the table at Xinu. Xinu caught it and started munching on it. "Your earnings are dwindling. The madam is just being kind, giving you a few dates to eat, and you still want to take advantage of me." "Well, that won't shut your dirty mouth." Rose pushed the plate toward her. "The madam told me to make sure you didn't give me less than what I deserved. It's all deducted from your earnings." Xinu stayed silent. Courtesans talk about superficial things all day, but aren't good at dealing with emotional scenes. She hadn't done anything wrong. She just couldn't stand the madam bullying the less valuable girls in the house. "All right, we're starting work soon. Get lost." Rose waved her hand dismissively, turning her head away. Xinu replied with a quick, "Oh," and left, not forgetting to spit the date pit on the ground. As she reached the door, she suddenly remembered something and turned back to ask Rose, "Does your young master Zhou know about your leg?" Bang! Rose answered with a teacup lid thrown at her, which shattered on the floor. Young Master Zhou had said he would take Rose away, but he had no money to buy her. Rose had fallen for him and secretly tried to escape at night, only to be discovered by the madam and had her leg broken. After that, young Master Zhou never returned to the brothel. People said he had a fierce wife who beat him half to death when she found out he visited brothels, and he never dared to step foot in that area again. After quarreling with Rose, Xinu finally left with a swaying waist. Rose shouted something at her from inside. Through the half-closed door, it wasn't clear, but Xinu could faintly hear 2 words: "Men fake." Xinu thought to herself that Rose had really become more cultured lately, to come up with such succinct and insightful phrases. "Thank you." She bowed toward the half-closed door. Rose is dead. She took a customer who was a bandit. The other girls wouldn't take him, so the madam tossed her into his room, a little maidservant said while serving tea. That bandit mistreated her, forcing Rose to smoke opium with him, tying her to the bed and beating her with a whip. Rose died like that on the bed. Xinu wasn't in the brothel that day. When she returned after attending to a guest, Rose's corpse had already been carried away by the madam's henchmen. Rose's death made Xinu realize she couldn't die in the brothel. Whether it was Mr. Zhang, Mr. Li, or Old Master Lu and Old Master Qin, she didn't care anymore. Anyone who would take her away would do. She thought she was still the madam's half-money tree, and leaving the brothel would be difficult, but the turn of events came quickly. Warlords fought each other, and the city was in chaos. The madam, clutching her money, hid away. The girls had no money and no means to support themselves, so many resorted to the little male servants in the brothel, running away together. She knew didn't run. A half-deaf cook extended a hand to her, but she didn't even glance at him. Even courtesans have their tempers. These opportunistic little male servants weren't worth more to her than the paying customers. The fighting in the city lasted 10 days. She hid in the brothel for 10 days, eating whatever she could find until only the well remained. On the 11th day, starving and dizzy, she even thought that when she truly couldn't hold on any longer, she would just jump into the well. At least she would have enough water to drink, so she wouldn't die of hunger. Wake up. A divine figure suddenly appeared before her. The fighting was over, and the soldiers in the city changed into military uniforms. People began to return to the city, and when the madam didn't see she knew, she assumed she had died during the fighting.
She knew was on a boat.
The person who saved her was a rather effeminate man named Li Shoa. He originally went to fetch water from the well while escaping, and unexpectedly found her there. "Mister, you saved me. I don't have anything to repay you with, so from now on I'm yours," she knew said to him. He saved her, fed her, and took her on a boat heading north, far from the brothel she had lived in since childhood. She would be grateful to him for life. Li Shua, who was raising his orchid fingers and practicing his vocal exercises, was interrupted by her, his expression unchanging. "No need. When we get off the boat, find your own way." He had some fame as an opera singer, and after escaping, he was headed north to continue performing. What would people say if an opera singer traveled with a courtesan? She knew wasn't planning on living like she used to. She could tell he wasn't a bad person, so she knelt down and clung tightly to his leg. "If you don't agree, I won't get up, and if I don't get up, you won't be able to continue your singing." Li Shua tried to pry her arms off, but surprisingly, she was stronger than him. This refined man nearly cursed, but in the end, he gave up. "Fine, I agree. Now let go." She knew immediately let go of his leg, then hugged his upper body instead, shouting loudly, "Master." He quickly covered her mouth, frowning deeply. "I meant you can be my attendant, not marry you. But I don't know how to serve anyone, except in bed." She removed his hand, her face neither blushing nor showing any shame. "Learn." Li Shua's face, however, turned red. This woman was going to be the death of him. How could she say such shameless things so casually? Listen to that. Only know how to serve in bed. His ears were burning from hearing it. It wasn't until she saw Li Shua perform on stage that she knew truly understood what kind of person he was, an opera fanatic. When he was on stage, he sang softly and delicately, moving the audience to tears. Even after stepping off stage, he stayed in character, wiping away his tears in front of the mirror. But he was truly beautiful, a beauty that radiated from his very bones. She knew was entranced by him. "Oh, dear. Are you trying to tear off my scalp?" She was helping him take off his wig backstage when she accidentally tugged on his real hair, earning her a scolding. "I already told you I don't know how to serve people," she muttered, sticking her tongue out. Every day, she either pulled his hair, ruined his clothes in the wash by mixing colors, or burnt the food until it was stuck to the bottom of the pot. Li Shua was constantly exasperated with her. But he had saved her, so he had to deal with her. One night, it was raining heavily, with thunder and lightning splitting the sky. "I'm scared," she knew, wearing only a thin garment, barged into Li Shua's room, feeling her way through the dark and squeezing into his bed, holding him tightly. In the darkness, his face was invisible, but his body immediately stiffened, and through clenched teeth, he said, "Let go." Then came another clap of thunder, and she held him even tighter, mumbling, "When I was young, during thunderstorms, I would find women who didn't have clients, and they would hold me to sleep. Later, when I started receiving clients, I was so exhausted that I didn't even notice the storms anymore." Li Shua froze. "Mister?" Her voice was soft. He made a nasal sound, not daring to move. "Hug me." He stared at the ceiling beams for a long time without saying anything. Then he swallowed and slowly, gently put his arms around her. "Mister?" she called again. "Do you despise me for selling my body?" When she didn't hear a reply, she answered herself. "Even if you do, I won't be upset. I often despise myself too." That night, Li Shua didn't speak again. He didn't answer her question, which was like indirectly giving her an answer. After some time passed, and he wanted to say something to explain his earlier silence, he suddenly realized that perhaps staying silent was the best choice. He had never interacted with someone like her before. Now that he had, his heart softened, but he didn't know how to care for her. Li Shua would go out to perform during the day, and sometimes she knew would go with him. In this area, Li Shua was becoming more and more famous, with high-ranking officials and noblemen among his admirers. Often, after a performance, people would come backstage to give him gifts. She discovered that not only was she infatuated with him, but many others were as well. Our master said that this Sunday, he invites Mr. Li to his mansion for tea. One of General Hu's men brought several golden hairpins backstage and laid them out in front of Li Shua. Despite the valuable gifts, Li Shua remained indifferent and smiled politely. "I'm terribly sorry, but I've already made plans with my wife to go out that day." He wrapped his arm around Shinu's shoulder, and it took her a moment to realize what was happening, stunned. The servant took the gifts and left, muttering under his breath, "Neither man nor woman," thinking they're so precious. On the way home in a rickshaw, Shinu finally asked, "When you said I'm your wife just now, was that just an excuse to brush that person off?" Li Shua's expression became a little awkward, and he lightly coughed.
"No."
"What did you say?" "I couldn't hear you clearly." She leaned closer, catching a faint whiff of his fragrance. "I said no." He turned his head, his voice louder this time, looking down at the street. She had never been so happy in her life. The moment he finished speaking, she lunged forward and bit his ear. The weight of the two of them shifted to one side, and the rickshaw tipped over, sending the two of them, along with the driver, tumbling to the ground. Li Shua shielded her, taking the brunt of the fall himself. "Mister, I really want to marry you right now," she said, lying on top of him, shamelessly speaking as usual, completely disregarding the fact that they were still on a public street. The joyful woman climbed onto Li Shua's bed again at night, but this time it wasn't out of fear from the thunder. She was excited to offer herself. However, Li Shua stopped her hands from wandering. "Joyful woman, I don't want to," he said, his voice a bit hoarse as he held her hands. "You don't need to rush to express your feelings like this. Wait until I marry you. I will cherish you." She obediently stopped moving and got up to return to her room, but he grabbed her hand. "I'm not just saying this casually. On Sunday, come with me to prepare for our wedding." Joyful woman thought that Li Shua calling her his wife in front of others was enough to give her status, but he actually wanted to prepare for a ceremony to marry her formally. From her experience with the women in the brothel, when someone was brought home, they usually just hired a sedan chair to take them through the back door. "Sir," she said, lying down next to him and pressing her face against his, "I'm so happy." Something warm fell from her face and wet his. After they married, the joyful woman often accompanied Li Shua to the opera troupe. He said he could support her so she didn't need to find work, and she was happy to stay close to him. Li Shua became the star of the troupe, gaining immense popularity, and a special seat was set aside for his wife in the audience. After a performance, the joyful woman went backstage to help him change and remove his makeup, now familiar enough that she no longer pulled his hair. Wow, Mr. Li is living the good life with such a beautiful wife. No wonder you've turned down my invitations to tea multiple times. A burly man walked in, a gun holster strapped to his waist. "General Hu, you're joking?" Li Shua smiled, instinctively pulling the joyful woman behind him. General Hu spat and sat down, slamming his gun holster on the table as he glared at Li Shua. "Li Shua, you're just an actor. I'm supporting you. It's your good fortune. But you've repeatedly rejected me. This is quite disrespectful." His face was fierce as he drew his gun, pointing it at Li Shua's head. "If you refuse me again today, I'll make sure you can't sing here anymore." General, who was a local bully, and no one dared to defy him. It was rumored that he had a peculiar hobby of playing with men. The joyful woman had never seen such a scene. In the past, during fights, she would hide in the brothel, but now, with a real gun pointed at her, she felt like she might wet herself. "The show can be skipped, but some things cannot be done," Li Shua said, holding her hand tightly, his hand trembling slightly, yet standing tall. General, who smashed a vase on the table and left. Despite everything, Li Shua continued to perform. After all, his fans included not only ill-intentioned General Hu but also many other powerful figures, and who didn't dare to go all out against him. As winter approached, the stove in their room glowed red, and Li Shua and the joyful woman snuggled together. "Give me a child. I love children, our child," he said, kissing her forehead deeply. The joyful woman was taken aback for a moment, looking at the hope on his face, and smiled as she nodded. "All right." That day, Li Shua was performing on stage again. The joyful woman was originally sitting in the audience, but suddenly felt abdominal pain, possibly from catching a chill, so she rushed to the restroom. As soon as she came out, she heard two men whispering in the corner. "Once that Li guy finishes singing and heads backstage, we'll knock him out and take him to the general. What if his woman is still around?" The general said that Li cares about her. "If both of them are there, it'll be tricky for us. So we should grab her first and use her to threaten Li. He'll definitely cooperate and come back with us. Anyway, the general said if we can't bring Li back today, we won't be coming back alive." The joyful woman gasped and covered her mouth in shock. After the last performance, however, Li Shua didn't make it back to the backstage. A large group of beggars suddenly rushed in from nowhere, causing chaos on and off the stage. In the confusion, someone grabbed his hand and pulled him out the door. "Let's go." The two men jumped into a rickshaw waiting outside, while the joyful woman was gasping for breath. Seeing the look of confusion on his face, she cupped his face and forced a bright smile. "The beggars were my idea. I paid them to rush in. Surprise, right? Oh, don't frown. I'm eager to go home and have a baby with you. This is how we're going home," he said, gesturing to his stage costume and the heavy headpiece on his head. The joyful woman nodded. "Yes, you look amazing like this." Once they got home, she pulled him inside, locked all the doors, and eagerly began to undress Li Shua. At first, he thought her comment about having a baby was a joke, but seeing her so impatient now, he found her amusing and adorable. In a moment of passion, he leaned in and kissed her. As their lips met, he realized that today she was different from usual. She responded to his kiss with an unprecedented fervor, wrapping her arms around his neck. With that kiss, he could feel her trembling all over. He wanted to embrace her and take her to the bed, but she stopped him. She continued to remove his stage costume, then washed a cloth to wipe off his makeup. Her movements were a bit forceful, causing him to want to gasp in pain a few times, but he endured it. "What's wrong?" he asked, holding her hand. "Nothing." After cleaning him up, the joyful woman sat in front of the vanity. "Sir, I've never told you this, but when you're on stage, you look so beautiful that I feel envious." She picked up a makeup brush and handed it to him, gripping his wrist. "Could you paint my face like yours today?" Her eyes were filled with longing and even a hint of pleading. Although Li Shua found her behavior strange today, he naturally agreed. Soon, the joyful woman's face was painted just like Li Shua's had been, and she wore his discarded costume and heavy headpiece. A stunning and elegant figure stood before him. "Sir, am I beautiful?" she asked, smiling, tears glistening in her eyes. "Beautiful." She was so captivating that it stirred a deep sense of tenderness within him. Just as Li Shua moved toward her, he heard loud banging on the front door, heavy, frantic knocks that made his heart race. He turned to see who was at the door but hadn't even touched it when something struck him from behind, knocking him unconscious. When the joyful woman opened the door, a group of people burst in, slamming the front door wide open. Seeing her standing there, they paused for a moment. She squeezed her voice and mimicked the tone of a performance. "Let's go. I've been waiting for the general for a long time." The men exchanged glances before finally taking the joyful woman back to the general's residence. Having watched Li Shua perform every day, she was preoccupied with his every gesture and expression along the way, anxious that they might spot any flaws. In truth, she was extremely nervous, but it wasn't about her own safety. She feared they might discover she wasn't really him and harm the real Li Shua, who she had hidden under the bed. Earlier, she had asked Li Shua if she was beautiful, to which he replied yes. What she truly wanted to ask was whether she matched his beauty. If she wore the same clothes and had the same makeup, if she could embody even a fraction of his beauty, then she could protect him. The joyful woman thought Li Shua was different from her. He was such a beautiful, pure person. He shouldn't be tarnished. She had seen countless coarse men like Lin Dashuai in her building, and such rough men could hurt him. Li Shua, being so perfect from head to toe, was meant to sing cleanly on stage for a lifetime. He was a deity in her heart. He had been, he was, and he always would be. And what happened next? Did the joyful woman come back? What about Li Shua? Life had become peaceful, and at a wonton stall near a theater in southern China, the owner asked the elderly storyteller. Later, when the joyful woman arrived at the general's residence, the general immediately sensed something was off. He thought that since she was willing to risk her life to protect Li Shua must have escaped the city. In a fit of rage, he shot at the joyful woman. She thought she was done for, but the bullet merely grazed her head, barely drawing blood from her left ear. The general is indeed a lustful scoundrel, but he also respected a woman of the world who could go to such lengths for her husband. He ordered her to be thrown out and never bothered her again. The joyful woman returned home and, under the cover of night, escaped the city with Li Shua heading south. Just as the elderly man finished the last wonton in his bowl, a similarly white-haired old woman approached from the other end of the street, holding a small pouch. She linked her arm with her husband's and pulled out the theater tickets she had bought the day before. As they walked toward the theater, she scolded him playfully. "Dear, you only thought about taking me out and forgot to bring the tickets, so I had to make another trip." The old man shrugged, tightening his grip on her arm. "Remembering to hold on to you for a lifetime is enough for me."